Framework 3.0 is in its third iteration of our framework planning for Columbus campus. The first framework plan was approved in 2010, and Framework 2.0 was approved in 2017. So what is a framework plan? It's a vision for the future to guide our decisions regarding how campus will develop. It also helps us understand what our build-out capacity is and how much growth can still be achieved. It is always evolving and is not a list of final projects. We do these large-scale updates every 5 to 7 years, but during the years in between, we are constantly digging deeper, looking closer, and analyzing the data that we gather to understand how things are changing. As needs surface, we allow the framework plan to guide us, but it will never be prescriptive. The projects we share with you today illustrate how we can meet our existing needs in ways that align with the principles that we have identified. However, they all require additional study before they will be considered or approved by the Board of Trustees. So let's talk about the process a little. We gained approval from the Board of Trustees in February of 2022 to begin the Framework 3.0 planning, and started the planning in earnest of May of that year. The first several months were spent assessing current conditions, collecting data, and engaging the campus community. The scenario planning workshops, which occurred the first 4 months of the year, allowed us to take what we had learned about campus and to start to form a vision for our future. A draft plan was presented to the board in May of 2023, and the final plan was approved just this August, on August 17th, 2023. We used a variety of methods of engagement to capture faculty, staff, and student perspectives about their campus experience. But listening was one of the most important skills that we utilized. We also gathered as much data as possible to capture university existing conditions. This data will continue to inform us beyond this planning process. One key data point that was summarized from our overall space, which highlighted areas of need and surplus. We found that we are lacking in important academic spaces like classrooms, teaching labs, research laboratories, vivaria, and several categories of amenity spaces such as dining, recreation, and gathering spaces. This slide demonstrates what I just mentioned in the previous slide, just using a different visual. As you can see, some of the areas are lacking by over 5 and 10%. In the future, the efficient use of space will continue to be at the forefront of every planning discussion we have here at the university. We also look closely into the enrollment across several key stakeholder groups and how an increase or a decrease in any of these stakeholder groups would impact our current space. In scenario 1, we wondered how a proportional decline of 4.2% or 2,000 students would impact our space needs. As you can see from this spiderweb diagram, we still have several areas of space deficiency, even with enrollment decreasing. In scenario 2, we explored how increases in undergrad enrollment, graduate students, faculty, and staff employees would change our space needs across the main campus. This diagram demonstrates an even greater need in research lab space, academic classroom space, and other specialties like dining, wellness, and gathering. While data gathered on several different fronts is extremely important to Framework 3.0, we also made sure to integrate several parallel plans into the plan to establish a comprehensive plan for the main campus. The Wexner Medical Center, the Student Life Facilities Planning, Carmenton, CFAES, the Athletic Department Planning, and the Strategic Infrastructure Planning are all now part of Framework 3.0. We also recognize that the university does not live in a bubble, so we made sure to integrate planning factors relevant to the Columbus region, the changing landscape of higher education, the workplace, and of course, research. Finally, throughout the entire Framework 3.0 process, we've kept our primary principles of stewardship, connectivity, experience, and community as our compass. Now it's time to take a deep look into the plan, and I'm pleased to introduce our Assistant Director of Facility Planning, Rebecca Gailey, who will provide a more in-depth overview of each of our planning regions.
Thanks, Chris, and good morning, everyone. As Chris stated, we'll walk through the districts of campus, kind of moving counterclockwise around the area and talk about some of the high-level vision transformative projects that we identified as part of Framework 3.0. We'll start in the core north. Should say each district has a similar sequence of slides. So we'll begin with some of the strategies that informed our planning, talk about connections, highlighted projects, and vision. So in the core north, this is our academic core of the campus. Our strategies that we focused on were really to infill and renovate, to improve programmatic adjacencies and meet some of those space needs that Chris just described. We wanted to strengthen open space and improve mobility connections, as well as enhance campus legibility. And then we wanted to provide an equitable experience for student success and discovery. That was something that we had a number of conversations about, especially in partnership with the folks in student life, to talk about how we can create an equitable experience for our students, whether, I guess, regardless of residence hall or academic major. So within the academic core, thinking about connections, our conversations focused a lot on encouraging traffic, pass-through traffic onto the edges of campus along Lane Avenue and High Street, and really focusing on that Woody Hayes corridor as an important east-west connection for pedestrians, for bicycles, for buses. And that allows folks to move pretty seamlessly from the core all the way to Carmenton on West Campus. Similarly, it's a dense campus, it's a big campus, and so we wanted to prioritize certain pedestrian pathways as well. As you can see, there's a number of projects that come online when we think, long term, it's really a capacity test of build out. But in the near term, there are some projects that we think are important. In the academic core specifically, we're excited around some ideas for an Evans Lab replacement. We have emptied and filled Evans Lab several times, and it has reached the end of its service life. And so we have worked with some consultants and partnerships with arts and sciences to think about a phased replacement for that building that helps us with our deferred maintenance and continued renewal of our facilities. We also looked at classrooms across campus as part of our space needs analysis. Many of our classrooms are still tablet armchairs, built and designed for a pedagogy based on lecture. And we want to move our campus more into the 21st century of active learning and group education. And so this classroom and teaching lab building would allow us to create those types of spaces and support our STEM learning with the teaching labs. Lastly, we worked with Student Life on their facilities master plan to understand how they can address facilities renewal of their own. They started a really tremendous transformation in the North Residential District that completed, I think, around 2016. And so there's still some work left to do in terms of renewing some of those facilities. And also there's some lower rise buildings there that could be replaced, as well as creating some community spaces for wellness, recreation, dining that would support the students who live there. So you'll see throughout the presentation, we have a series of before-after renderings of what we envisioned and the transformation we're hoping for. This is looking at Hansford Quad. So this is Denny Hall in the foreground, Annie and John Glenn, and in the background, 19th in the North Residential District. This is something that started with Framework 1.0 and 2.0, this idea of this great green space coming through campus. And it's something that we are looking forward to completing. This relies on a number of moves. We would have to renovate Hughes Hall to help with the demolition of Denny, but it's a project. It may take years, but we are looking forward to doing this because we think it really enhances the core of campus. This is the classroom and teaching lab building to the right of the quad that I mentioned. Heading west to the River and Midwest District. In this area, again, we thought a lot about east-west connections, especially as development occurs in Carmenton. This becomes an important hinge on campus. We wanted to leverage university and city transit and infrastructure projects planned for this area, and always, addressing facility condition through renewal and replacement where possible. And of course, the Olentangy River runs through here, and we want to continue engaging the river as an active part of campus. So in terms of those connections, we're excited about some projects with the city around bus rapid transit that will happen along Olentangy River Road, and we'll place 2 transit stations on our campus that will just help visitors, students, staff, and faculty move around, arrive on campus easily and move around campus with sort of a easy connection to our CABS bus system. Some highlighted projects to call out. You'll see that there's a fairly prominent parking garage that's proposed on a parking lot today. Again, just thinking about this area of campus as being able to receive folks from 315, give them an easy way to park and transition to cabs, or if they're arriving on BRT, transition to cabs to minimize traffic within campus. There are some proposed buildings for FAES, the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences. They did a master plan of their own in 2021, and so we picked up a lot of those ideas. You'll see this bubble calling out an interdepartmental building, including teaching lab spaces for their students. There's some expansion options for vet med in the long-term plan as well. One idea that we're very excited about is a fairly bold idea for how the Woody Hayes corridor can transform over time. Today, if you're familiar with it, in the core north, it's very dense and active and lots of folks crossing it every day. As you move to the west, it starts to feel less like a campus street and maybe more like a suburban street. It's 4 lanes. The buildings are set back quite a ways from the street. And so we wanted to think about how we could maybe use some complete street design to create dedicated bus lanes, separated protected bicycle lane, as well as pedestrian facilities. So this is the broad concept for it. There's a sequence here. Next, this is a sectional view. So you can see the proposed transit center on the campus. We're looking east. On the south side of the road to the right of the screen, that's the proposed interdepartmental building for FAES. And you can begin to see some of those dedicated lanes for buses, as well as the bike lane that's proposed. And this would extend from Carmenton to the west to Tuttle Drive, arriving in the core north of campus. This is what it looks like today. You can see that it's the road is wide. If you zoomed in on the speed limit sign, it says 25, but I think folks tend to move through this area as quickly as possible. And so what we would like to see in this area is very different. It would be a really dynamic, vibrant, pedestrian-friendly area of campus. You can see how just bringing some of the buildings a little closer to the road activates that street level. As well, we'll see when we look at Carmenton, there's this idea of kind of creating this green connection through campus, and we think that we can do that as well with some of the landscaping through here. So moving on to Carmenton, our strategies here, I should start by saying that planning for this area was completed with a separate team of architects and engineers and planners working with SciTech. SciTech is an affiliate of the university. And so we held several coordinating meetings with that planning team in order to make sure that the concepts that they were developing would be folded into Framework 3.0. So the planning for Carmenton focused really on the first phase of development in the northeast corner of the site. It's such a large site, and everyone agreed that making the right first move was very important. Planning also looked at the potential to leverage existing roads and infrastructure, including green and blue infrastructure for the site, and then providing a really dynamic mix of uses and densities and space typologies on the site. So I mentioned that this greensward idea, it is really something, I think it's been around a while in Framework 1.0 and 2.0 planning, because there are pieces and parcels of this green space throughout the West Campus. It's used by neighbors and faculty, staff, students for walking and biking. And so there was a strong idea in the beginning to really connect those parcels and create this strong green spine through the site. And it performs important stormwater functions, as well as creating, an inviting recreational green space that's appealing to all users of the site. So layered on to that green connection are vehicular and pedestrian pathways. And the planning team was very important to consider the mix of uses that will be on this site well into the future, and establish a roadway network that is pedestrian in scale and provides necessary access to all areas of the site. So as I mentioned, phase 1 development focused on the northeast corner at Kenny and Lane Avenue. This builds upon investments that the university has made with the Pelotonia Research Center, the Energy Advancement Innovation Center, as well as the James Outpatient Care. Whoops, that advanced a little too quickly, but phase 2 development kind of takes that and proceeds west along Lane Avenue. It includes expansion to James Outpatient Care, creating a mix of uses that include research for our folks, for sponsored research, for retail, for some office uses, and as well as housing, including an important affordable housing component to it all. So the vision overall is, to create a dynamic, pedestrian-focused neighborhood with research facilities for researchers, corporate partners, startups, along with convenient retail and housing. The result is really a true community that embodies innovation. You can also see clearly here the green connection, the green sward, green spine through the site, and the just vibrant plan for the phase 1 and 2 development. Okay, moving on to the health sciences and Wexner Medical Center. Again, as Chris mentioned, in our efforts for comprehensive planning, the Wexner Medical Center completed a facilities optimization plan that identified a lot of important priority projects for them. And so we wanted to incorporate that into Framework 3.0, as well as think about improving programmatic adjacencies, improving the facility condition of the facilities here. That's very important since there's so much great research and clinical care happening in this area. We also wanted to strengthen connections and legibility for this area, as well as provide space for future growth. So this is our densest, probably most intensive use in district on campus. There's just a lot happening here, and so connections are important. North-south connections that may become available over time in the future, as well as connections to 315 and to Carmenton. Academic medical centers all sort of have this three-legged stool of research, clinical, and academic. We're no different. We are almost here today in terms of how uses are organized on the site. There are some important moves that we can make to make this a little bit clearer, particularly with some moves we can make within the academic component of this. So the highlighted projects, as I mentioned, this is a very dense area of campus. And so, every step really involves enabling moves. We won't get into all of those moves, but I'll talk about a couple of things here. A priority for the Wexner Medical Center is an expansion to the Ross Hart Hospital. And you can see that to the south of the site. This is an important move for them. There are some buildings that are there today that we needed to plan for how we could move those folks. One building that is there is Atwell Hall, excuse me, that houses the School for Health Rehabilitation Sciences. And so if we want to build an expansion for Ross, we have to plan for that. We identified a location just to the east on the site where Myling Hall and Graves Hall sit today. It's great. It pulls some of the academic focuses over to Neal Avenue and builds upon investments we've made to the Interdisciplinary Health Sciences Center as well as Hamilton Hall. But in order to do that, we need to rehome the research that is there. And so if you skip up to Herrick Drive and 12th Avenue, you see a green building. And that's an idea to renovate the biological sciences building there to house some of those research functions. That move is enabled by the Evans Lab replacement. So as you can see, it's like a very tightly woven plan here to make some of these moves happen. This is a before-after view. We're looking east again. This is Graves Hall and Myling Hall in the foreground. You can see how Graves is sort of inefficiently sited on this block right in the middle. It makes it hard to build on either side of it. And so what we're looking at is transforming this area over time. If we can move Graves, if we can move the functions in Myling, it frees up potentially 3 academic building sites that would just continue to build on the investments we've made for academics, health sciences, specifically along Neal Avenue. Right, course south. Again, working closely with student life. We wanted to focus on accommodating unmet housing demand and improving housing quality. That was very important in the South District, thinking about the equity of experience. There's also an effort to de-densify housing rooms and then provide the necessary amenity spaces to support community in this district. Those were all important strategies we were pursuing. In terms of connections, you can see the vehicular movement along Neal Avenue and 11th, but it's worth pointing out too the important pedestrian connections because that connects through Mirror Lake Hollow and the Student Union Events Lawn and the Oval to the north of campus. And so this sort of exists in parts today, and we just want to continue strengthening that. I mentioned a lot of focus in this district on housing and renovating some of the housing in the South. It's an important priority for student life, as well as creating, recreational and dining facilities that really support the number of students who will be housed in this district. The Oval has a very, well-known identity in our minds. We refer to the area south of it as the South Oval. Sometimes that identity gets lost a bit. And so we spent a lot of time reimagining that green space to the south of the Oval as the Student Union Events Lawn and how we could program that better, as well as making improvements to Mirror Lake Hollow. This is 11th Avenue today, as just to the right of the screen, this arched building is Jesse Owens South. That's a facility that has probably nearly reached the end of its service life. And so we're looking for opportunities to replace that and expand recreation opportunities. The parcels behind it in the background are mostly owned by the university and are largely surface parking. And so we think there's some opportunity to use those parcels, either us directly or in partnership with a third party to provide some additional housing. Excuse me. And so in the future, we see 11th Avenue, today, if you look at that image, it very much feels like an edge condition, edge of campus. And our vision is to really kind of weave that back into the campus fabric by providing some important uses along there and just creating street level activity. Our final district, not a geographic district, but important to cover broadly: wayfinding, edges, gateways, placemaking, campus legibility, as we discussed. So connections are very important. We are a large campus, kind of a city within a city. Some of our edges are clearly defined, I think, along High Street and Lane Avenue. And then there are some areas of campus that are much more porous. And so how can we make an effort to be a little bit more intentional in those areas so folks know that they've arrived on campus? So we thought through some opportunities for signage and branding with the 315 overpasses along Lane, Woody Hayes, Ackerman. There's some opportunities there. There may be some opportunities as well with the rail lines that cross around campus. Along some of our edges, we thought there, it doesn't have to be a monumental gateway, but maybe there are some opportunities like at the corner of Lane and High to create some smaller scale signage that also doubles as a photo opportunity for folks so that, okay, I've arrived on campus. I think it's similar in that before after photo that we saw for Woody Hayes, that, that just reinforces that idea that you've arrived on campus. And then this is our last before after rendering. We've pulled it into this section because we think it really demonstrates a lot of these ideas and concepts that we've been investigating. So this is Neal Avenue. This is north of the library. That's engineering building to the left of the photo. Behind these trees is a arts and sciences building. And so this is a one-way road, I believe. And you can see, thousands of students pass through here during class changes. It's a really active part of our core of campus, but you can see it just feels a little bit like a space between buildings. It doesn't feel very special or like you could be on campus clearly, but there's nothing really significant about that. And so we want to change that, find these opportunities to enhance that and really think about those spaces between campus and how we can extend sort of the campus there and the legibility of the campus. And it could be as simple as adding some banners and some elevated landscaping.
And we have been talking about Neal Avenue as our kind of academic spine or academic main street since Framework 1.0. And a lot of work has happened on Neal Avenue, especially south of the library since then. And you can recognize that change pretty significantly. But we think Framework 3.0, it's time to really focus north of the library. And so, and continue that effort for this long-term change.
Yep, that's a great point. All right, so that we've gone through all the districts. I'm going to turn things back over to Chris to wrap up for us.
Well, thanks, Rebecca. And I think as you all can see, we are fortunate to have such a content expert and great planner as part of our team here at Ohio State. And so as we think about recommendations, we look back to the process we went through. We engaged hundreds of people face-to-face and thousands electronically, analyzed a huge amount of data, and really dug deep into all parts of our campus. But several key recommendations have come out of Framework 3.0, and we want to highlight those here today. The first is community. It is about equity, excellence, and diversity. As you look at experience, we focus on wayfinding from highway to hallway and the moments and amenities scattered throughout campus. As you look at stewardship, we have to think about our assets, our brand, and our people. And again, with stewardship, I would add the importance of focusing on our deferred maintenance throughout the campus and how any move we do from a planning perspective can improve that. And finally, connecting all campus users to activated public spaces that are functional, cohesive, while making sure to enhance connectivity across the campus with a complete streets concept in roadway design. But there are some very specific things that we should do in order to bring Framework to life and to put things into practice. One is uniform scheduling software and metrics that will help to maximize the utilization of our spaces. We also intend, and this will be starting very soon, to develop facility master plans for each of our 14 colleges. CFAES, as shown in an earlier slide, completed their master plan in 2021, and that was incorporated into this framework. And so a big goal for us moving forward is to move on these master plans for each of our 14 colleges, and it will help us translate these principles into prioritized, actionable next steps aligned with a funding model. So as we look to wrap up our webinar this morning, and address any questions that you may have, we do want to provide a few more resources to help you learn about Framework. The first there is the website. We are in the process of updating the website as it relates to Framework. and anticipate that to be done here in the new year with updated information, most of the information that you learned about today in this presentation. Also have provided contact information for Rebecca and myself, so feel free to reach out to us if you have any additional questions that we did not cover today, or that may just come to mind after you let this ruminate a little bit moving forward. But now we're to the point of our webinar where we're going to turn it over to Amanda Hofsis, who is going to help moderate any of the questions that have come throughout the presentation.
Great, thanks, Chris. We have just a couple questions so far, but I encourage any of you listening in to post your questions, and we'll sort through them. We'll answer many of them live and try to get through as many as we can here today. One question that has been asked so far is related to bike lanes, and specifically how that relates to Carmenton. The answer is yes. We have been thinking about bike lanes formally in Carmenton, but also how that then connects back to our primary campus. You can see that in the diagrams we had for Woody Hayes. And you can see that in practice in the new road that we built along the western edge of the Pelotonia Research Center and EAIC. You can see how that begins to take shape. And so that same approach we will follow through with at least on all of the primary streets within Carmenton to create a connected neighborhood. And that's Carmenton is really envisioned to be a neighborhood, an innovation neighborhood. And so those types of assets are going to be critical to make that neighborhood sing. Moving on, we had not exactly a question, but a hurrah, I think, to just say, really thinking about branding and the campus edges and how important it is to better define that for lots of reasons, right? Even as specifically as the media, what do they know what's campus and what's not, and how do we help define that for everyone? So that's an interesting comment, and thank you for that. How is enrollment tracking to your scenario planning? I'm going to throw this one to Rebecca so she can talk about how that is tracking.
So as Chris pointed out with the scenario slides, we had quite a few conversations with enrollment services within the university to understand, what are the things that they're factoring in, in terms of enrollment cliff and different scenarios into the future. And so as we did our design charrettes and thought about these areas, we held those scenarios in our mind. We didn't attach a year to any of those. It was sort of a threshold that in the future, if we hit this enrollment target, here's where some of our space needs are going to be. And then we tried to be careful with our scenarios that we left a lot of flexibility so that we could address those enrollment needs that, then trigger all of the space needs attached to it. But, it's intended to be flexible. And so we may not, depending on how that enrollment growth goes, we may not need all of that space until, sometime into more of our long-term plan. But we wanted to make sure that we built in the flexibility to address that, whatever may come within each of our districts.
Great, thank you so much. The next question is probably for Chris. How will consistency be maintained between the various college master plans?
Thanks, Amanda. I think that is a great question. And, each college will have different needs as it relates to their facilities and to meet their strategic plans for their college. However, we need to make sure that not only are we aligning those master plans with Framework 3.0, but that we're also being consistent and taking a hard look, and I mentioned this term earlier, but looking at our deferred maintenance and the assessments of those buildings, and how can we tackle tackle that topic by studying those assessments. And so as we look at those college master plans, we'll be using some valuable information from our partners at FDC that have already gone through a thorough assessment of our buildings and making sure that not only are we meeting the needs of each college, but that we're aligning with what we want to do across the entire university.
Great, thanks, Chris. The next question, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but I think I understand the question. So I'm going to ask this of Rebecca and say, how were students involved in the development of Framework 3.0? And then how will they be involved in its implementation going forward?
That's a great question. So involvement in Framework 3.0, we had representatives from undergraduate student government on our core team, and that was a group that met monthly to review concepts for Framework, review sort of any analysis coming out of Framework. It was made up of actually representatives from all of the sort of units within the college. And so we also worked with them. They were invited to all of our design workshops, as well as representatives of the graduate council. And so I think we had a lot of conversations with them. I really am thankful for our student life colleagues on this project because that's what they are so comfortable working with students all the time and having those conversations. And I think that really enriched our planning as well. We had a number of open houses around campus, I think 3 or 4 different times throughout the planning process where we had tables outside of the residence halls and collected feedback. In terms of how we'll incorporate them moving forward, I think that's a really great question. And I think as we sort of think about the facilities plans for the colleges, there may be some opportunities there to work with colleges and have listening sessions with their students, maybe have some of their representatives involved in the executive team for that planning. And then I think the rest is, just keeping an open dialogue with students as projects are happening. I think that we could probably think about that a little bit more, how we can be even more intentional about it. But, I think we like to be available and happy to talk to student groups and hear their feedback anytime possible.
I'll add to that each framework plan, 1, 2, and 3 had a significant amount of student engagement. This time we also did a lot of surveys with students to try to attract feedback when we couldn't get to everyone live. And so there will be a next iteration of framework. We're on about a 5 to 7 year cycle, and I think that will continue. And then in between, I think it gets very project specific, right? So as the projects roll out, there's opportunities for student engagement on the project specific side as well. So appreciate that.
Yeah, I just thought too, Chris and I presented to this fall to a design studio, I think mainly juniors in the interior design program. And I thought that was a really great model where, they were working on their own projects about making some improvements on campus to different areas. And so we were able to give them the background on framework and talk about our principles and, what we want to achieve so that they could incorporate that. So I would welcome future collaborations like that.
And I would add one more thing to that, and kind of building off the last question, in terms of consistency of the college plans, making sure that the student voice is a part of those plans and that planning process will be important, as well as the faculty and staff, but all stakeholders will need to be included in that planning process.
Great, yeah. Our next question relates to student housing. It's there's a few layers to it. I'll try to take a crack at this and ask my colleagues to jump in and add some color. One of the primary ideas from this question is, how are we accommodating students? Central Ohio is growing rapidly, and we already have a shortage of housing in our community. What is our strategy kind of as this, no doubt, this increased population in Central Ohio continues? What are we going to do for students, and what's our strategy around that? And I would say it's really twofold. It's looking at both on campus housing and then private housing, both perhaps on campus or near campus, and how do we promote that? We know we need more, and our sustainability hat on, we know we'd like it as close to campus as possible to reduce commutes and to really improve the kind of 24-hour campus environment. And so thinking about that in a hard way, and also making sure we don't forget about our existing facilities so that there's equitability between the spaces people, the newer spaces people get assigned to when they're on campus, and maybe some of our older spaces, to make sure things are equitable. And so the last segment of that is around affordability. And that's obviously important for on campus. We hear that loud and clear from students that they need choices, not just on typology, but on cost. You know, they're required to live on campus for the first 2 years as students, and they want some options in that regard. But then, you know, for their upper level years, and then if they choose to be graduate students, what then? And how do we give them some affordable options? And there's options both on campus and off. And so I think as we look to P3 partnerships for perhaps private run, but maybe on campus property housing, you know, we think that would have a pretty strong affordable layer to it. We are taking our lead from the city of Columbus that we're in, because these same private entities would have to follow some similar affordability measures off campus. And the good news is the city of Columbus is going to ask for approval of new legislation that would allow for some tax abatements if certain affordability measures are met. And I think we are looking to see how we might mirror that if we choose to do partnerships on campus. So I think those are some of the ways we're going to be attacking both the quantity and the affordability issues that we have. What a remaining question is, do the colleges have an understanding of their current space utilization, or should we expect this to be an initial step in the planning work?
And I will jump in and take that one, and my colleagues can add to it. But you know, as part of starting the college facility master planning, our first step will be the assessment phase. And I think colleges should expect a close look into not only space utilization, but how can we optimize the current space we're using. And so while we will also be looking at, you know, the condition of our facilities, how space is being used will be just as important part of this planning work. And so the answer is yes. I think all the colleges should expect for us to dig into utilization and optimization.
I would say that there's probably various levels of understanding by college. I think some colleges are very sophisticated in their understanding of their space utilizations. But it'll be incumbent on the team that for each college to make that a pretty important, critical kind of first step to be smart and about the data and existing conditions today. That's the last of the questions I have. If there's any other questions, I'll just give everyone a minute to think if they have any last questions to be asked and answered. We'd be happy to continue. Or if everyone feels good, you could always reach out later with the questions that might pop up that we haven't yet answered. I think with no other questions, I'll turn it back to Chris for some final words.
Yeah, so we definitely want to thank you all for taking the time today to learn about Framework 3.0. This has been a great opportunity for us to, on a larger scale, get the word out to the community. And please know that we are here if you have any further questions or want to learn more about Framework 3.0. And as we start to implement things, we will also be available to take those types of questions. So again, thank you for your participation and have a wonderful weekend.